Dr. Baker, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to turn back the clock and look at some of those unsung heroes. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So your specialty in your PhD studies has to do with some of these unsung heroes, specifically in the area of Seventh-day Adventists who were involved in the civil rights movement. So tell us about a couple people and who you'd like to share with us this evening.
Well, since this is a program about prayer, Candace, I wanted to highlight three individuals that had three strikes against them, because I believe that prayer, the power of prayer specifically, is best seen in extreme human circumstances.
Okay.
Where there are formidable odds and even quandaries and dilemmas that humans can't solve by themselves. They need God to solve them. And these women had three strikes against them. First, they were black. And each of them grew up in the Jim Crow South in the first half of the 20th century. And they suffered discrimination, bias, and outright racism because of the color of their skin. Their second strike against them was that they were women. And like Black History Month was specifically assigned because blacks have largely been cut out of history, women have also, been cut out of history. And their third strike was they were Seventh-day Adventists. And especially in the first half of the 1900s, it was a tiny denomination.
Sure.
It wasn't as well known as it's known now.
Correct.
And so they also suffered discrimination on that score. But these women, through the power of prayer, overcame all three odds. And all of them were honored by heaven, and they were honored by the President of the United States. And so these are tremendous individuals.
Okay, well, let's hear about them. Who's the first individual?
The first one is Irene Morgan.
Okay.
And she's from Gloucester County, Virginia.
Not too far from here.
Yes, yes, yes. In July of 1944, it was a steamy and sweltering summer. And she's traveling from Gloucester County to Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay.
And she's getting on the bus. And in fact, she's a mother of two, and she just recently had a miscarriage.
Ooh.
So she's compromised physically. And she went about 5 rows back to the colored section of the bus. You recall there are two sections, and the colored section is the furthest one to the back. And the white section, of course, is closer for ease and convenience. And she sits next to another young woman who's holding an infant, a young mother who's holding an infant in her arms.
Okay.
And about 30 miles up the road, the bus driver stops and passengers board, and there's a white couple. And because the bus is full, the bus driver commands that Irene Morgan and the young mother sitting next to her give their seats up.
For the young couple?
Yes, for the white couple. And so the young lady next to Irene Morgan, she complies, and she gets up, if you can imagine her, holding her infant.
Baby, yeah.
Oh yeah, holding her baby. And she's, trying to hold on to the pole, and the bus is wobbly. And Irene Morgan, I've actually spoken to her about this. Of course, she died a couple of years ago. But I've actually spoken to her. She says at that moment, she prayed. And she felt that God was telling her to stay seated.
So she had the guts to stay seated on the bus.
Yes. So she stayed where she was, and of course the man let his wife sit down.
Right.
And so there's a white man who wants her seat.
Oh my.
And so.
And she's still seated.
She's still seated. She doesn't get up. And she's praying. She's offering a quick prayer. And one thing about these two women that I'm going to highlight, they're women of prayer. They just don't pray. It's not a discrete and one-time thing. They're actually women who incorporate an attitude of prayer into their whole life.
Okay.
And so she stays seated, and she refuses to get up, and the bus driver, who has command of the bus, drives to the nearest sheriff's office with an adjoining jail, which happens to be convenient. And the deputy, who Morgan describes as sort of menacing, he's hawking probably around my size. He says, get up. get up expletive. And she refuses to get up. And he puts his hands on her. Now, she wasn't the sort of timid Christian of the caricatures, you know, the meek and mild Christian. She was a woman of prayer, but she also had
She
some
was strong.
spunk.
Yeah, for sure.
And that spunk came from her faith. And she gave the sheriff's deputy a run for his money. I won't tell you what she did, but she gave him a couple of punches. But they finally extricated her from her seat, took her off the bus, flailing, and they jailed her.
Unbelievable.
But her case became iconic, and it became an exemplary case. And ultimately, Thurgood Marshall, the famed civil rights lawyer and later judge, took up her case. And about 2 years later, it became a law from her case that it was illegal to segregate interstate buses.
Very good.
And so her prayer, this small woman, she was small in stature, through the power of prayer, she literally changed the laws of the nation, bettered the racial situation tremendously, and I believe set off the civil rights movement. You recall Rosa Parks was 10 years later.
Yeah, see, we know that name, but I had never heard of the name of Irene Morgan.
Yes, yes, and so in 2000, President Bill Clinton gave her the Presidential Medallion of Honor.
Very good.
And so she was not only was her prayer acknowledged by people of faith in the civil rights movement, but this is the larger nation in the world.
Very good.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for that story, and I can't wait to hear the next one. We're going to go back to David in just a second to take some of our social media, and then we'll come back to you to hear the story of the other unsung hero you're going to tell us about. But I love this story in that you say that she had the 3 counts against her, and yet her prayer was a catalyst for such a change. That is very inspiring. Thank you for that.
Thank you.